Hello and good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining the webcast where we will discuss how security leaders can best prepare for executive board discussions. For those of you who are new to our webcast, this webcast is part of our knowledge series where we select a topic each month that our security experts have been seeing or hearing about in the industry, and we simply ask them to give their thoughts on it. Before we jump into the presentation, I'd like to review a few housekeeping items. We will be hosting a Q&A at the end of the presentation, but feel free to submit questions as they come up. When submitting a question, please be sure to use the Q&A function on your WebEx screen instead of the chat function, as that will help us better track and address questions at the end. All attendees have been muted upon entry, but please be sure that you remain muted during the presentation to help eliminate background noise. Also, keep in mind that the presentation will be recorded and the link will be sent to all registered attendees by the end of the week. Without further delay, I'd like to introduce two members of our Office of the CISO team, starting with Renee Gutman, who is our VP of Information Risk, and James Robinson, who is our Director of Information Security, both who are tasked here with providing guidance to security leaders to create successful security strategies for our partners and clients. Both are well-seasoned security professionals with proven track records in the industry. We're definitely in good hands today for this presentation. With that said, Renee, I'll hand it over to you.
So thank you, and again, welcome to our audience, and looking forward to speaking about this because it's been a topic that myself and James and even the rest of the members of the Office of the CISO team have been getting questions about for quite some time, and that's how do I prepare for the board? You know, how do I get ready? And it's no wonder that security practitioners and CEOs and CIOs, for that matter, are spending more time in front of the board with all the headlines, you know, that are out there. I was traveling yesterday, and as I was watching the news, I saw headlines about the White House, and I was listening to some headlines last night about ransomware. So again, it's no wonder that the public, shareholders, employees, regulatory authorities, you know, are actually expecting and requiring more conscientious and comprehensive oversight from boards of public companies. And that's what's leading to, you know, CISOs and CIOs and other security practitioners being tasked to go and meet with the board and present to them, you know, where they are with the security strategy. So the first thing that I want to say is that preparing for a boardroom meeting is not a task. It's actually more of a journey and it's a process, and that's what we want to walk you through today. And there are measurements to know if you're on track in terms of being ready to address the board, both effectively for them, but you also want to be confident when you meet with the board yourself, because these are really high-stakes conversations that you're having at this point in your career. So let me turn it over to the agenda. Here's what we're going to cover today. James, did you turn? There you are. Okay, so the topics today in terms of how to prepare effectively for this type of high-stakes conversation, there are a couple of these that will seem sort of intuitive. The first is know your audience, and I'm going to turn that over to James in a minute to talk a little bit more about that and why it's important. But we also want to spend a fair amount of time during this particular webcast talking about the National Association of Corporate Directors Cyber Risk Oversight Guidance and what the implications of this guidance is to your program. Now, for those who are not familiar with the National Association of Corporate Directors, they are a nonprofit. They have been around for 35 years, and they have about 15,000 members, not only in the U.S., but spread around the rest of the world. And their goal is really to help corporate directors to address complex challenge and also to establish leading boardroom practices. So what we're going to talk about today, you know, is the beginning of what I'm going to consider leading boardroom practices that are being adopted by corporate directors, you know, of various companies. And throughout this presentation, just because this comes up quite often when preparing for the board, we want to have some high-level conversation around crown jewels, and also we want to talk a little bit about benchmarking and the various ways that that can impact your program. So with that, let me turn it over to James.
Yeah, thanks, Renee, and welcome everyone. So Good hits on the agenda. Hopefully everyone gets a piece of information they can take with them back into their own program or preparing for their own even executive conversations, not just board conversations. And the last thing is, this material, we're going to hit some material that we've pulled from others that is really good guidance. We're going to hit some material that Renee and I have used in our own board presentations and guidance that we've given to our clients. And so it's just a wealth of knowledge that we've collected everywhere, and I agree that it's a journey, it's not just a task. So the first thing within your journey is to really know your audience, and this is one that anytime I get a board conversation or I get someone that sends me an email and says, hey, quick, I need to present to the board, can you give me your template? I quickly say, what group are you actually presenting to? And I quickly find out that sometimes it's a board member that's part of an audit committee, or it's the actual audit committee that they're presenting to, or it's maybe a different group that they're presenting to that has board guidance and oversight. Sometimes it is the board. And the reason why I ask that is because each time there's different ways that you need to present, different pieces of information that you should share, different strategies you can take, different tactics, right? Understanding that I like to say audit has a lot of influence, but they don't have any budget, right? The board has a lot of budget and influence that way, but the executive committee that get established maybe even have more oversight into the budget and how it's spending, and should it be allocated to business or should it be allocated to information risk management, and so really understanding your audience is, I think, key in really starting your journey and saying, here's our first step, here's who we're presenting to, and here's the level of information or detail that we need to present with. The next thing is, and I have a funny story on this one, is understand your timeline. So one of our good friends, I'd like to say he's a friend of the family, right? But we were talking to him, and he said, oh, I got the opportunity to present to my board. And the example he gave, he said, it was my first time, it was a great opportunity, and so we said, well, that's amazing, that's awesome. Finally, your program's getting elevated up to the level in which, you wanted to. And then we said, well, how much information did you present? He came back and he said, I had 32 slides that I put together. And right away, myself and a few of my colleagues kind of looked at each other like, whoa, 32 slides. And the first thing we said was, did anyone else present to your board members or to that committee that you were presenting to? He said, oh, yeah, I had my boss and also a couple of business leaders. We said, well, how much material did they present on? And he came back and he said, they presented on, they had 3 slides each, but I had 32. It was amazing. I blew them out of the water. And right away we said, whoa, we think you may have given them a lot of information or information that they didn't even need. And so we quickly dove into, let's review that, and we helped them to up-level that information. But the key is, your first time that you're presenting to the board or to a board committee, you're probably going to get a little leniency. You're probably going to be able to, if most groups that are reoccurring presenters are presenting 3 to 4 slides or something like that, you may be able to slide in a few more, maybe 4 to 5 or maybe even 6 if you have one on a big event that happened in the last quarter, right? So you have to be mindful of their time, be mindful of all the different opportunities and different things that they have on their plate as well. And also be mindful of how many slides and how much material are they going over in the board presentations or in the board meetings. You don't have to, you definitely have to hit a home run, but you don't have to hit multiple home runs your first time up. You just have to deliver a strong presentation and delivery and move forward. Another thing that kind of speaks to the next one up in the upper right is identify either other people that have been in your organization or other areas where they've presented to the board or had board presentations. And the closer you can get it to your topic, the better. So if there's board presentations on, let's say, technology and technology risk or technology direction, something like that, sometimes it's a little easier for us as gearheads, if that's your background, to see a presentation like that and then relate off of it and present and reuse that material and also reuse the presentation style and kind of the templates in that, which I think is one that we all do, right? And then the next one, which is one that I've heard this from a good colleague, a good friend of mine, and he said, what I did was I researched my board members, and I found out where else were they board members. And then I reached out to the CISOs of those companies where they were board members and asked them to see if, see the presentation, maybe not the exact presentation, but at least have the discussion and see the presentation style and template and the questions that were asked. So he basically did his own reconnaissance to figure out his board members and determine what was this presentation and what was the ask and what was the tone, and could there be things that he actually included in his presentation that had been heard before, so he didn't have to re-educate. He didn't have to, realign the board. He basically was speaking to things that they'd already heard before and they understood, and which helped out both programs in the end, right? Because then that board member could go back to that other group and say, what do you have going on, and also, they're basically seeing that material again and again, and so they can compare the two. So, Renee, I think there was also a point you wanted to make.
So I think, I think the other piece too there is that, James, it's funny even when you mentioned that the guy, your friend, had 25, how many pages he had, and the other people only had 2. I mean, the fact of the matter is the board is comparing you and whoever is speaking to them against, other boards they may be members of, but they also, and this is the lead-in, they also may be comparing what you're presenting to what they've seen in the cyber risk oversight document, which is what we're going to talk about next. So, James, if you flip to this next slide. So, the cyber risk oversight, and this is actually a picture of the cover because I want you to be able to recognize it in case you see all of your board members, with a printed copy of this sitting in front of them. And it is available for free, so you can go out and download it for yourself. Some people have told me it's a little hard to find, but if you do run into trouble, we can certainly help you to get it because it is for free, and it's also available through some other websites. But this is guidance that was prepared for corporate directors by the NACD, and it was prepared by a couple of different organizations, AIG, the ISA, as well as many thought leaders that we would recognize in our industry. And it's a simple read. It's only about 25 pages, but it's chock-a-block full of really valuable information, including what I'm going to call the 5 steps that all board members should consider as they seek to enhance oversight of cyber risks, and that's a direct quote. This paper, it's 25 pages. It's not intended, when you read through it, and I've read it a number of times, it's not intended to be prescriptive, but it is intended to encourage conversation and reflection, and I want you to reflect upon that a little bit more when we talk later about when this paper talks about frameworks. Let's move to the next slide, James. So we wanted to play a video from you that's actually on the NACD website, and for various technical reasons we couldn't, but it's only about 2.5 minutes. So in addition to encouraging you to get the cyber risk oversight guidance, I would really encourage you to go and review this video because it's really promotional video for an upcoming NACD conference in May on, I think it's cyber strategy and risk. I may have that slightly wrong, but I know that that's a large part of the topic because they have former Secretary of Homeland Defense speaking, and some of the topics are actually quite in-depth, including there's a section on the Internet of Things. But at the end of the day, you'll see, or one of the first headlines that James showed was about boards being under attack. And we talk about that, and I haven't really seen any examples. James, if you go back to that first, can you go back 4? Are you able to scroll back to the very first? Yeah. Data breaches may result in board breakups. So if you think about not only the reasons why board members would want this information, they want it because they want to be able to perform their fiduciary responsibilities better, but they themselves are on the front lines when it comes to cyber risk. And again, if you go through the video, you'll see a number of headlines that actually show that very point. So with that, let's go back through again, and let's cover the very first step or the very first principle in the NACD guidance. And as I mentioned, there are about 5 of these. Each of these sections, by the way, these 5 steps or these 5 principles, is no more than about 2 or 3 pages in the report. But within each section, they cover several topics, and they also give a fair number of examples. So again, it's a very practical document. But this first principle that is being provided as guidance to the board is that directors need to understand and approach cybersecurity as an enterprise risk management issue and not just as an IT issue. And when you read this particular section, it's pretty clear that the board understands that this is not an IT matter only. In fact, what they say is that the budgets are too tight in IT, and the fact that there's a possibility that folks in IT may be disconnected from the business. So it really needs to be addressed more as an enterprise-wide risk, and not everybody has an enterprise risk strategy. So again, this may fall to different people coming together to talk about this, but again, people from different disciplines, to ensure that there's a good cross-representation of not only what's happening within IT, but what's happening within the business. There's recognition, secondly, in this particular 3-page section that some of the breaches are being caused, by systems that are located outside of IT, and they give some different examples there, and I think we all know some of those as well. And so therefore, again, it's important that this be addressed not just as an IT issue, because the board clearly understands that the business has budget, and they have the ability to go and put information in the cloud and potentially move it to a third-party supplier. So the board is being cautioned here to understand how well management understands its own ecosystem. And the third key point in this section is that there's the beginning of a discussion around crown jewels, and I know that we've all heard that term in our careers. And it talks about, how these need to be defined and how they need to be protected. It also says in this section that boards shouldn't just consider high probability attacks, but they should also consider low probability attacks that may be catastrophic to these crown jewels. So again, I want to talk a little bit more about crown jewels in a minute, because James and I have been on a mission for the last couple of months, and we asked people, how do you do this? And we get really quite how many answers, James? One for every person we asked in terms of how they define crown jewels. So
just about.
At a time coming together and putting something simple, based on some conversations we have about how to define this, because this is going to come up over and over again in this 25-page document, which is how well is the corporation protecting the crown jewels. But let me turn it over to you, James, for a second.
Yeah, and this first principle is an interesting one, right? Because it's one that I think all of us we've been really challenged with over time. We've been really struggling. If we've been part of an IT organization, we've been struggling with moving the security program to a higher level, not necessarily out of IT. Sometimes it makes sense for it to remain in IT, but also have oversight and governance and be able to operate differently from within IT or operate differently outside of IT. So there's a lot of people that when I talk with, they say, well, I want to move security outside of IT. And I've also had conversations with folks that have moved security outside of IT and have moved it back into IT, just because the relationship needs to be so strong with IT, because that's where there's so many different control points and also some opportunities for efficiencies. And one of the things that James Christiansen and we've been working on is this alignment with enterprise risk. So on the takeaways piece, you're really looking at how do you up-level everything that you're doing into an enterprise risk framework or into an enterprise risk oversight function, and we'll get into that one a little bit next. The next one is, a key way to up-level your program outside of IT is to identify the stakeholders outside of IT. Now, a lot of times that immediately, what jumps to my mind is, well, I'm going to go and build a relationship with HR, which maybe I already have that relationship. I'm going to go build that relationship with legal. Well, maybe I already have that relationship. One of the key things that we find is programs and organizations are not building that relationship with the business. And what do I mean by the business? It's those folks that are tasked with every day maybe producing a product, producing work product or a service or driving revenue for the company, and aligning with them and their programs to manage the risk as they move forward with their business alignment, with their goals and objectives that are meeting probably something that was set forth by the CEO, is definitely where the security programs need to be heading, and where we have been putting a lot of focus and attention on as well with that enterprise risk alignment. So I kind of look at things in two different ways. One, you can align with enterprise risks, so those things like information risk management or technology risk management. So you can align with those, but then you can also align with key business objectives and strategies, which could be, growth into new markets, things like that. The next thing is with that, you get into the partnership with leadership, and then, also don't overlook the third-party risk, which is one that should be different than information risk. Sometimes third-party risk is information risk and falls within that as you share information with your partners. But then other times, third-party risk is maybe it's a supplier. So maybe you're getting information from them. What happens if that supplier's information or systems become compromised and they're feeding you bad data or bad systems? In previous roles with other companies, that was something we really worried about with source code. If we outsourced a component or something like that inside of the workflow, we actually had something else developed that we relied on. Maybe it was firmware for a specific chip that we needed. Did we make sure that that had strong integrity so that we could develop an operating system that leveraged the components of that chip? That was something that we had to think about and look at. One of the ways that programs are doing this, and this is another one that James Christiansen and I have worked a lot on. James Christiansen is a peer of Renee and myself, and him and I have worked a lot on the 3 lines of defense. And the 3 lines of defense basically says you have the first line of defense is the group that's going to be your operating group. It's going to be the ones that are doing the controls. Traditionally, I looked at this group as your IT security group. Then you have a second line of defense that is the oversight group, and the group that actually starts to manage the information risk management. It's also the group that's going to present information up to the next level, to the third line of defense. But it's also the group that's setting that guidance, those policies, maybe the architecture, and these are all things that need to be discussed and defined what works inside of your organization. But really it's kind of the glue in between that third line and that second line. And there's still a lot of tangible things that need to be done inside of there. Don't get to think that the second line of defense is just a policy group and that's all they do. There's actually a lot of technology. Maybe there's assessments. Architecture and assessments are very technology centric, and also, as I like to say, you have to have technology chops to get those done correctly. And then the third line of defense is your audit group. That's your audit oversight. That's probably one of the groups that you're going to be presenting to when you're giving board guidance. It's going to be the group that's coming in and assessing both second line and third line, and really driving that out to say, we're an independent operations, we're an independent group that's going to understand, and assess everyone inside of this company. It could be external experts as well. So it could be third parties that way, or maybe even the audit group brings in external experts. Now, adopting the 3 lines of defense is not something that you just jump into. It's not something that you just say, well, today we're going to have the 3 lines of defense. A lot of times organizations need to understand, well, what is this new model that you're operating within? And this was exactly what we were challenged with, James and I. We were challenged with one of our clients, and they said, we really would like to do the 3 lines of defense, but it's really hard for us to discuss this on information risk management. And I said, well, are you using the 3 lines of defense anywhere else? And they came back and said, no, I don't think so. And I said, well, I think possibly you can, but let's just break it down. Well, this client happened to be a group that was in food, so they were kind of a retail food group. And so this group said, well, one of the things that we're really worried about from the risk management oversight group is our food safety and our food safety program. And I said, well, let's break down the food safety program into 3 lines of defense that you would have and operate, and let's put these into this model, and then let's try to take this, so that's the way that we can explain what the 3 lines of defense model is, and then let's also do the same thing for information risk management. And right away when we presented it to the CFO and to the head of the risk committee, they came back and said, wow, I get it. Like, automatically they understood what we were doing, but it was because we tied it to to food safety, right, which was something that that group was really worried about. And one of the things, just to point out really quickly, their first line of defense was the stuff that people did to clean, basically clean the work environment. So every day they had to clean the work environment. The second was independent groups that came in that wrote policy, wrote directions on how to maintain food safety, but then also independent groups that came in and did assessments of the area, right? And it was point in time, maybe once a week they would come in. And then the third line of defense was the audit group, which would do their own independent assessments, make sure that the second line was writing the policy and guidance and also doing their assessments, and the first line was actually doing their daily cleanups and operating with good food hygiene. So moving forward. Renee, I think you were going to take this one, right?
Yeah, so I said I would spend a few minutes on the crown jewels, and it's only because it comes up, and I really should have counted the number of times it comes up in the report. But there's a few points that I want to make here. One, the boards are actually told in this report that not everything has the same value. In fact, there's even a mention of overspending on things that have lesser value. But they do want to know that you have the management of the company has identified the crown jewels of the company. And again, I'm not fussy about the term, but that we'll save that for a future conversation. They want to make sure that the high-value assets have been identified appropriately by the business, so that they can support the business. Now, I know people that have attempted to leverage existing classification schemes for data and DR schemes, and my only caution there is that if you attempt to do that, at least make sure that it accurately reflects systems that may have moved to the cloud or may have moved, outside of the environment, because some of those lists tend to be fairly data-centric heavy. But if you take a look at this very simple workflow, and again, this is pretty much what they talk about in this report, you get the stakeholders together, you agree on what's important, and I'm not a boil the ocean kind of person, so I'm saying find the top 6% or the 3% of things that can either ruin the business or that can make somebody else rich or by regulation can shut you down. And then when you identify those assets, and we'll talk some more about this later as well, identify the threats. Who are the key adversaries that might want those types of assets? And then go back and understand what types of controls you have in place. And if you feel, based on what you know, or if you do some benchmarking around how other companies protect those types of assets, you'll probably want to put together a plan with some Series A activities and some longer-term activities to ensure that when you stand up again in front of your leadership or the board of directors, that you have confidence that you can answer the question, how well are we protecting our crown jewels or high-value assets? So okay, go on, Denny.
Renee, one thing I want to add on there that I heard you say, and I wanted to add a little more color to is, when stuff gets moved outside of your organization, you need to understand that it's, the potential there that maybe it's not an information asset. Maybe it's something different. One client that I was working with, they were actually moving stuff out, and with that, they kind of looked at it and said, well, maybe one of our own assets is also how do we touch our clients. And they actually found out that their social media site was actually registered, so that it's a property and an asset that they really don't even own. They own the trademark, but they don't own the asset, which is a social media properties asset. And that one was one that actually registered very high when they were able to look at it. An example of that maybe it doesn't even come back to your organization, but maybe it's just your diligence as an organization and kind of its duty, in this larger ecosystem that we live in with our daily lives. If you look at the Associated Press and their Twitter site, when it got hacked, how much did that actually impact the world? It didn't really impact Associated Press, in my opinion, when their site got hacked. It was a couple of years ago. But what the big thing was is they actually had to shut down trading. They actually stopped trading. They actually, had to make a lot of communications by other media and outlets that it was because of the site that got compromised, and the event that actually happened wasn't actually true. They talked about, the White House actually getting attacked was what happened. That's a very key point to understand. This is not something that even their social media site was that big of an asset to themselves, right? Their website is probably a bigger asset than their social media site. But in the ecosystem of the world, it was huge. And that's something to just keep thinking about as well when you're going through and understanding what these high-value assets or crown jewels are.
So the second principle, and I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because it really is that headline that I showed you at the beginning, which is that boards may themselves come under fire. This whole section, principle 2, is really about the fact that boards need to understand the cyber risks as they not only relate to the company, but how they relate to themselves individually. For example, a breach may spawn lawsuits, especially if the board is deemed to be negligent in their fiduciary duty. And again, some of these words are taken directly from the report. So it's pretty, this report was then written in 2014, so it's pretty obvious that people that are now seeing this, that boards are going to be asking more questions. But this section, and be more concerned even about themselves and how well they are performing. And that's why, again, they'll probably take a good look at this 25-page document because it is so full of guidance that they can leverage. But there's another section in here in this principle. I talked about the fact that each section is 2 or 3 pages. And in this particular area, there's also discussion about public disclosures. When might somebody need to disclose? So boards will probably ask that question. It's not something security practitioners can probably answer without having, help from other stakeholders. But there is a good paragraph on SEC disclosures in this particular section. And then there's also mention in here that one of the ways that boards can show that they are meeting their fiduciary responsibility is by ensuring that there is regular discussion at meetings about cybersecurity. And it even goes so far as to suggest that in these meetings that there be information about who was present, what were the updates of the program, and also evidence of how the cyber risk program is integrating with the rest of corporate strategy and policies and business activities. So I'll go back to something that I said at the very, very beginning of this webcast, and that is that the guidance itself, states that this is, these 25 pages are meant to, provide background to generate some dialogue. But I think along the way, you will see evidence of what I'm going to call more prescriptive guidance. And I know for a fact, having talked to several security practitioners over the last couple months, that there are corporate directors that are taking this guidance verbatim and running with it. And I'll give another example in a minute. So let me turn it back to you, James.
Thanks, Renee. So what are some of the takeaways that we had on this one? And a lot of these takeaways are things that we advise our clients on whenever we're kind of talking through these, or even things that have come from roundtable discussions and that. So the understanding the regulatory environment, this one, it speaks directly to what Renee was speaking about, but also one of the things that we like to look at is, rich, ruined, and regulated. So how, when you're speaking with different business units and you're partnering and you're preparing that board presentation, understand, how could someone get rich off of us? How could someone ruin us as a company or organization? And then what things do you have as a business unit, or what things are inside of the company that are regulated that you need to understand? And a lot of times the business partners understand that, or the business organizations understand that. Sometimes it's a legal conversation that you need to have. Sometimes it's a chief privacy officer conversation, or even a controller that you need to talk with. But that's really a kind of a focus area that we really highlight on. Those 3 R's is what we call them. Understand the importance of documentation and language, which was interesting guidance, and one that we talked to, and we really kind of we were like, well, what is that? What is the point there? And really the key there is, what are the board meeting minutes? And with these board minutes, then if something does happen, they can say, well, we do understand our cyber risk environment, or information risk environment. We do have the conversations. And look, we have the conversation at a scheduled time inside of a board meeting, and here's the minutes to prove that. So that's something that's key and something to focus on and make sure it's in there, and even to give guidance to the board member if you can, to say, look, we need to make sure that this was captured to protect yourself, right, if there is something that ever does happen. And always try to set up the conversation and saying, you know, we're trying to be prepared or best prepared for the event of something happening, and most likely something will happen. It's really how do you respond to that event that's going to happen. And then determine how the meetings and activity notes will be managed is kind of speaking to that same one. But understanding that quarterly you're going to have 15 minutes or 30 minutes of conversation. There was topics and discussions on what are the current threats and what's happening in the industry, what's happening to other organizations, and then what's exactly happening to your organization. Moving on.
Yeah, the key there is don't be haphazard on this stuff. So on this next one, there's a couple points there. And again, we just spent some time talking about the fact that executives need to expect that there will be adequate time given to cyber risk discussions on the agenda. But here's, I think, the piece you need to know. When the NACD had a meeting, they found that 13% of the people that they met with, that corporate directors, really found that they admitted that the lack of knowledge made it hard to oversee and properly do diligence to this area of cyber risk. Another 34% of the people that were surveyed said they didn't really receive enough data, and then 1.6% of people said they got too much data. And so the key message here is that what's happening as a result of this potential disconnect between the leaders of the company and the boards or the audit committees, that they're not quite understanding what each other's saying, is that boards are being advised to go out and get their own independent advisors. And it's being suggested that they conduct deep dive sessions with auditors, with other organizations, people that have multi-client and industry-wide perspectives. There's even, recommendation that they go and consult with some government entities. And this is pretty important because I think, you need to know, are you successfully communicating with your board? And if you're not, who are they actually going to for advice? I'll tell one quick story. I have a friend in New York City who makes a really good living attending board meetings, and then after the CIO and the CISO leaves the board meeting, they get kicked out. And he listens to the entire thing, and then he sits with the board and he tells them the questions that they should be asking the next time these people come back. So this is, we've got to, James, show the next slide. We've got to do a better job at communication. We've got to speak in business terms. We have to really, really make sure that we can explain ourselves and become that trusted advisor. And we also, and I'll point this out, we also want to make sure that this is not what our strategy looks like. We need to have a lot better strategy than just throwing up a bunch of fear, uncertainty, and doubt in front of the board members. So if that's the way you're speaking right now, or that's the way you believe that you are speaking to board members, one of the pieces of advice that I will give you is to sign up for some courses, what are they called? Just, public speaking courses, and rehearse, all right? You have to rehearse for these types of conversations and get that honest feedback. So, James, that was my quick slide.
Yeah, and that's really important one. Those business terms are really important. One of the things that I've even done inside of my own programs that I've helped to build and run is change the terms. Everyone knows what a defect is if you're a software organization, right? So you can communicate about defects. They'll talk vulnerabilities, talk about information risk management, third-party risk, those types of things. And you understand that there's a lot of different points and even items that can be mapped to multiple areas, but just up-leveling a lot of that conversation into those generic terms or more general terms goes a long way in speaking in business terms and being able to effectively communicate with senior executives and board members. some of the takeaways that we had on here is, you know, the resources your boards and senior leaders may be leveraging external. Funny story on this one, and Renee, you had a great example there with your friend or your colleague who makes a good living by just helping boards out by the questions that they should ask. But one example I had was I was working with a client, and we started looking at their board list, and we found out that there was actually an NACD member on their board. And so we said, whoa, hold on. There's a good chance that either one, you probably need to you know, get the guidance and get a copy of it, and you can speak directly to it. But understand, you possibly have an ally or an asset on the board that you could leverage because of this guidance and because of these things. You know, that there's going to be less communication and education that has to be done there. You know, so it's really kind of speaks to earlier about knowing your audience and getting that information about who your audience will be. Ensure the verbal and written communications is appropriate for the audience. That really goes to up-leveling, asking for assistance, making sure that, you know, when you communicate with, you know, peers, partners, you know, the head of legal, get that guidance, you know, understand not only your audience, but who else has presented there, and kind of speaks to that one again. And then performing independent assessments is an important, that's an important one, because you can say, you know, we had an independent group come in and perform this assessment on us, and the goal there is so they don't have to, right? Knowing who they're getting that audience or who they're getting that guidance from, and expect that they will all get guidance from different folks that are external, right? And it's just about getting it to a point where when they actually get the guidance, they come and validate that guidance against yourself as the security leader, instead of actually validating it or directing it towards someone else that then, you know, becomes basically a top-down directive to your program, right? So you're even working with the board and partnering with the board more than just having the board dictate certain items and things that are happening. So you really want to be part of that trusted advisor for the board, instead of them basically not knowing who you are or directing things to you. So that's really, you know, really kind of the takeaway there.
So in the next principle, and we've got one more left to go after this, there really are 2 points that are being made here. And that is what I go back to what I said earlier, is that, you know, there really has to be this cross-functional team, including people from finance, HR, people that are part of the business unit. And secondly, you know, this guidance says that this team, this group, will actually leverage industry standard frameworks, and that they will conduct even a review, which is what James was just saying, of their program in terms of based on a 4-tier scale, which is, are they, you know, at the maturity 1, or are they all the way up to repeatable, or are they at the adaptive? So again, this comes back to what we were talking about earlier. There will be benchmarks that occur, not only those that you yourself perform, but maybe those that are commissioned by the board and others, you know, to see how well the program is doing. And I think one of the cautions there is just the, you know, when you get benchmarked, it's really important to understand the goal of the benchmark, and then, of course, what industries are you being benchmarked against. So there's a whole, what I'm going to call, art form to being benchmarked or to being part of a benchmark. But anyway, this is, you know, I think someone would argue that this is sound advice, and that, you know, taking an industry standard framework is a reasonable thing to do. The caution that I have here is that if I turn to that section, there's probably half of that section talks about the NIST framework. And I said again that even though this document wasn't meant to be prescriptive, there are sections of it that feel a little bit more prescriptive. And so I actually have a story of somebody that implemented the NIST framework. When I asked him why, he told me that his board had told him to. So my next slide here, I'm going to call it, James, if you put it up. James, is really what I'm going to call framework soup, and just go through it. When you get to Principle 4, should you start talking about the NIST framework, and I think there's a possibility that if the board does read this document, that you will have that conversation. This is a really good opportunity for you to act as that trusted advisor for that, you know, to talk to the the corporate director or the senior leader about the fact that there are actually multiple frameworks and they take time to get to. And then in addition to, potentially considering the NIST framework, you may have to be looking at privacy frameworks. You may have to be looking at a PCI framework. So this is, I think, a nice opportunity, if you do have that kind of conversation, to really bring them in and help educate them and make them aware of the breadth of, the frameworks that your organization is actually responsible for adhering to. So, James, do I have you next? And we're going to leave a few minutes for questions, I hope.
Yep. So the next thing, once you understand those high-value assets and you're going through the guidance, one of the ways to help prioritize or at least explain to the board, how an asset might be compromised and where your program is going. And again, speaking to the board is more about saying here's where my program is at and really not going for the ask. Going for the ask of more money, personally, I feel is more an executive conversation and not a board conversation. But explaining kind of here's our threat and here's where we're at. One of the key things that we look at is threat modeling and understanding how to use high-level threat models to say this is a key asset that we have. Here is an actor or someone within our organization, in this case an insider, that would want to get access to this asset, and here's how they would do it, and then scoring yourself on that. So you can do this using third parties or independent parties, and I've taught many workshops and done webcasts and all kinds of fun stuff about threat modeling or high-level threat modeling. But it's a key way or it's an easy way for you to say, we feel that this is a top threat, and here is something that we're trying to protect, and here's how that thing that wants to get access to it, here's how they would do that, and here's our position against it. And here's where our program is going, which is kind of the key thing to lay out for the board. Here's where our program is going and the investments and things that are being made to really reduce this risk and to make sure that we're able to also respond to whenever this incident does happen, if it does happen or something does happen. Again, going back and having the executive conversation to say, look, I need to make this investment and here's where we're at is key in that. Moving forward, the other thing too is to make sure that you have your proper scorecard. So a lot of times when you're leading in your first presentation, I mentioned that person that had that 30 slides. You have to make it very simple, and you have to break it down. Your first presentation will be unlike any other that you give. This right here is more of an update type presentation, looking at governance and risk management, your scoring, and did you have any findings from audit, and what's the risk level there, and what's the trend up and down, and really just to drive conversation. There's a couple different ways that you can present to the board. There's one that you can actually do it in conversation, which I think is much easier because you can add context and you can field questions. But sometimes they want the conversation and they want everything to be done, or they don't want any conversation that has to stand on its own, which it definitely is a lot tougher to do because every slide has to have a lot more information. Either that or be simplified to the point where context is pretty tough to keep. But that's the challenges of speaking and building a presentation for the board. Hopefully you can guide it to be more conversation based, and that's the opportunity that you get. Definitely those are the ones that I like myself.
And even if you do have a PCI framework or a NIST framework, don't go to the board with 25 pages of here's how we're doing against that thing.
Yes.
So, right, that'll be an aha moment. So the last slide really, or the last principle, is really about everybody recognizes that this is not a perfect science, and even if you go back to that video that I shared with you or that I couldn't share and we just showed the headlines, there's a lot of talk about if not if but when. So the board knows this. They want to make sure that you've identified those key risks, those crown jewels. They also want to make sure that they have, that they understand their risk posture. What's their risk appetite? And what risks are they willing to accept or avoid, or where are they even going to potentially acquire cyber insurance? And if you go down the path of cyber insurance, this is not likely something that you as a security practitioner would undertake by yourself. You probably partner with somebody in the CRO or in the the insurance group. But I do find it interesting that one of the questions that the board is asking is actually, are they covered by cyber insurance policy that is being taken out by the company? Anyway, we haven't done a lot of work yet in preparing guidance on cyber insurance. All I will say is that, they're not all the same, and you really need to, work with the folks that are acquiring the policy, especially if that policy requires you to do a survey of your controls.
Yeah, and the takeaways on that one. What was that, Renee?
My phone's doing funny things. I want to make sure I was still on.
Oh, yes, you're still here. The key takeaways on this one, Renee mentioned that we haven't done a lot of work on this, and it's just basically the nature of our organization, but the guidance that we have given and the programs that we have helped out, and even the programs that we run ourselves, when we start looking at liability insurance, it's not all the same. It's very early on in its maturity. Some of the things that I've even seen is, sometimes cyber liability insurance inside the policy will say that you have to have a breach policy. And if you do not have a document that says this is my breach policy, or something that calls out inside of another policy that says this will also be our breach policy, then you basically are null on your policy, and that's something that really is kind of problematic with the space right now, and something that, inside of any guidance, that's what I give to the clients, is to say you have to know every line by line. You have to really understand, what are you actually going to use the insurance for? What's the point of it? And really, insurance helps you to recover. It doesn't help from the incident or breach actually happening. And so, to say, well, we're just going to insure from this to happen is also not or we're going to insure this so when it does happen we can recover, is not something that is good guidance either. And definitely not going to hold its weight, right? Because what's going to end up happening is if that is the stance that's taken, so basically we're not going to try to prevent, or we're not going to try to detect anything happening. All we're going to do is say it's going to happen no matter what. We're just going to get insurance for this. Is really going to be a situation that when you look at those other frameworks, when you don't follow the other principles of this, you're going to have some problems. And basically, it's going to be the situation, Renee, I know that we've talked about this before, but it's going to be a situation where, if an independent group comes in and does the assessment of the program and does the assessment of all those board meeting minutes and has all those conversations, they're going to find out that basically diligence wasn't being applied within the organization. So insurance is definitely something that we recommend folks go and get. It's definitely something we recommend folks investigate at a minimum, and with that, make sure that you know what your policy that you're getting signed up for, what that actually is, and what those clauses are, and make sure that you can meet those different clauses inside of there, either with existing or with other policies that maybe have to be developed and practices that have to be adopted.
Thank you. So let me just summarize real quick. I'm going to read from the document, the NACD guidance. It says cybersecurity is a serious corporate risk affecting all levels of significant business activity. And so what I want you to take from this, I'm not going to go through these bullets, is that to prepare for these high-stakes conversations, in order for the company to know that you've done a good job and your program is doing a good job, it's not like cramming for an exam and pulling together a bunch of glossies. This is really a journey, and as we identified, there are some metrics, there's some milestones and some measurements that the board can actually look for in terms of understanding how well the program is, managing the assets of the corporation. When you get into a situation, where you get called to the board, it's one of those, defining moments. But I think, as Jane said, with all this guidance that's being given to the board, if nothing else, I see this as a good thing. They are being informed, they are interested, and if we play our cards right by getting the right partnerships in place, we have a real win-win opportunity for people that remember that article last summer, Pity the Poor CISO, you know, I think that represents a time when the only person that cared about this and wanted to learn about it, you know, was potentially that CISO. Well, we've moved well beyond that day with this guidance. I think the NACD has done a tremendous job in terms of bringing awareness to a very complex topic. And, you know, I think if you're lucky enough to have a board member who's maybe the CEO of an insurance company or maybe even, you know, the CEO of an information security company, I think that's a really good opportunity for you to work collaboratively with them and make sure that they, you, and the company are successful. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. 5 minutes to go. James, do you have anything else?
I don't. I think it's Q&A time.
Yep. So if you guys have any questions that you need to submit, please submit them using the Q&A function at the bottom. I'll tally those for the presenters. We do have one that has come up. What would be a good approach to express the financial impact if security is not addressed?
Renee, you want to take that, or you want me to?
How about you start? Well, I have a thought, but it's best formulated.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple different ways. To express financial impact is definitely one that can be difficult. We know what has happened in the past. So I like to say if you have a breach of PII or credit card information or even PHI, you can look at the examples that have happened, you know, from the past and say, here's exactly what the cost was for these organizations and how they actually managed through this. So that's one way that I have done that before with organizations that have had a large amount of PHI, looking at that asset to say, here is our crown jewel asset or a critical high value information asset, and then looking at it and saying, here's how many records we have of PHI inside of here. If this asset was to be compromised, here's the steps that would take for this compromise of this asset, and then also here's the value of this asset for the organization as far as impact. So that's really how I've taken the approach. You know, history repeats itself. Also looking at it from any type of guidance that has been set, or any time a case proceeding is defined. Now you have case law. And with case law, you know, automatically gets driven out to basically laws that you have to follow, or at least laws that you'd have to argue in court. And, you know, no lawyer really wants to be in that situation, or company wants to be in that situation, because at that point you're just spending money. You know, there is definitely a reason to do it, but at that point you're spending money. So that's how I look at it, is that way.
Yeah, I mean, there is some guidance, and I was looking for it in this document. It's on page 14, and it does say that boards should encourage management to frame the company's cybersecurity investments in terms of ROI. And what they're saying there is that, at a minimum, make sure that the cost to protect it doesn't exceed sort of the cost of the loss. And again, the loss is, you know, we've looked at things, well, what if I lost, you know, a piece of IP? I think we have to do a better job of framing what loss really means, and that comes back to how can somebody ruin us, how can somebody, you know, get rich off us. We have to think a lot further than just even what the cost has been in previous breaches, and that comes back to understanding why something is a high-value asset. What is it? What is the value of it to the company? And if it disappeared or was gone tomorrow, what would that potentially look like? Right? And I don't think that security themselves can answer that question without some significant partnering.
Yeah, you know, one thing that just came to mind. Oh, go ahead.
From my level, I always put safety first. I think that we have underestimated the impact of cyber risk on the possibility of either safety or people's perception of how well they are safe or how well they are being protected. And I would put that first.
One thing I was going to add on there is, you know, you mentioned ROI, but there could also, you know, you could say ROI, you know, within the security program is reduction of impact, and how do you manage that, manage the reduction of impact instead of return on investment. So that's the way to maybe think about it and to discuss with the board or with the executive leadership team.
Great, thank you guys. Your next question, what language resonates with the board when talking cybersecurity risk? What seems to work the best?
Renee, you want to take that?
I'm just going to say that I think simple, not overly complicated, and just make sure that it's aligned with your business. Whatever you're speaking about can't be in the context of someone else's business. And I really am not happy about people bringing in FUD. And the slide that I showed that has all that horror stuff on it, that doesn't work either.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Part of it is establishing what is going to be that common language that you're going to use. So we've already spoke to ROI, which could be return on investment, but could be reduction of impact. There's also reduction of risk that you could look at. So you really almost have to establish that, through side conversations, right? You definitely don't want to be establishing those terms when you get into the board meeting. It's definitely, these are conversations that you should have leading up to the board meeting and with different executive leadership or board members or people who are going to be in the board meeting with you.
Yeah, James, I just want to add to that. I've never found that the information security or CISO is the only person speaking. So the best way to prepare for the board is go get the rest of the board position papers and basically clone yourself and look at the culture and how they want to be addressed, because other people are in the same boat.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, questions are flooding in, so we'll try to stay on the line for a little bit here. I know we're up on the hour to get through a couple more of these. So when management finally provides the resources necessary to transform the state of security, how do you show incremental progress to the board without getting into the weeds at a project level?
So I'll answer that.
Right.
Go ahead, James.
No, go for it, Renee.
So let me answer it. If you've developed a strategy, okay, at a very high level, let's make it a 3-year plan, and year 1 is what you're going to do, and whether you're building out your team and whether you're implementing policy or awareness. And then the other thing I always tell people when they're developing a strategy, don't overlook the fact that the business is also doing things. So maybe they're moving all of the email systems to the cloud. So don't build a strategy that takes up 100% of your time. But once you have defined, what is the strategy, and you also know that, today your team potentially looks reactive, that in the future you want to be more proactive, you want to move from compliance to risk, then you define a series of activities that you measure. And I've done things on a quarterly basis so that I can generate that one-page scorecard and really measure how effective we are on the different initiatives that line up towards the strategy. And again, keeping it as simple as I can, but, each one of these initiatives does translate into probably more of an in-depth project plan. It's just you don't want to show the project plan to the board.
Yeah, you may be able to present on some key milestones that you've achieved. And it all depends on how the conversation is going as well. If it's more of a conversation where you say, here's a milestone and here's why this is relevant in context, that always makes it a lot easier. If it's something like, we've been able to, we've taken the approach to reduce kind of the areas where someone can get into our environment or network. That's a very easy and kind of a simple way of stating that you've taken the approach of implementing vulnerability management programs, external scanning. At that point, you've also, probably taken on reduced attack surface. You've probably hardened systems. So there's a lot of things that go into that. It's really just a key milestone, and building those milestones to be simple. That's usually the way that I communicate those.
The only other comment is that as you start building a program and start to see things actually get worse before they look better. So you have to kind of prepare people for that, because if they've never seen a vulnerability scan in the environment, it could be quite shocking. And that's why I think you lay out things in terms, you have to set all these expectations up front and then just follow the plan.
Perfect, thanks. So guys, one more question here. What are you finding with customers that are just now getting into cybersecurity? Where do they typically choose to start? Protecting the crown jewels or something else like perimeter security? If you are open to sharing your board, or are you open to sharing your board presentations with clients as well? I know
so I would say it. James mentioned that there was a board presentation that I had. None of this is my stuff. A lot of this comes from the NACD. In terms of where we're actually encouraging people to start, is we are actually asking people to start with an assessment of what your business is. You know, what are those things that you would call the crown jewels? Interviewing key stakeholders, bringing people together, finding out what's working, what's not working, and then helping them to build a high-level roadmap of activities, of actions that they can take to draw down the risk. And if part of that roadmap includes putting up some perimeter security, that may be a byproduct of the strategy. On the other hand, if the whole company, and I know companies like this, where they have one server left in the data room, then they've got to have an entirely different strategy for how to protect their crown jewels. So I think the first is, you know, you've got to do that reflection and figure out where you are, but it's that teamwork, and it's also not just where you are today, but you want to ask those team players, like marketing, for example, like where do you expect to be in 3 years? You know, how much social media do you expect to leverage? So it's not just building the strategy for today, but it's hopefully with some kind of future proofing going on, and you just got to, you know, go back and realize that whatever you built today, you'll probably be reviewing it in a year from now to see how well it's working and to see how the environment's changed.
Yeah, I'd agree with that as well. Too many times have I seen strategies and plans put in place that are based off of today's threats and not where the business is going tomorrow. So they'll look at things and say we need to build bigger walls around our perimeter. You know, but they're not taking in account that 60 or 70% of the workforce is mobile. So you know they have a bigger perimeter, but they haven't built that perimeter or that you know that basically extended the perimeter to include those mobile you know that mobile workforce. The other thing is cloud is another one. If the business is moving more and more to cloud systems, you know, which high value assets are going to be moving to those cloud systems, and how are you going to protect those? And what are the things that you need to do? It may not always be a preventative detection that you can put in place. Maybe it's more of a reaction type detection, or being able to identify and react quicker, right? So explaining that that's going to have to be the strategy that you take because you're giving up some of the control, right? Obviously there's business incentives to move to cloud systems, but as you give up that control and that visibility into that environment, you know, a lot of times your strategy is going to have to change to be more reactionary, and then also be able to recover from that event happening. And so you just have to take a different approach there, and communicating it that way is I think, the simplest. On the note about sharing the presentation and sharing the presentations we have, it really comes down to if you really want examples of presentations, we can definitely jump on a call or have a conversation about it. But what I found is the most effective way is to get example presentations of what's been shared inside of your own environment. Board presentations are still one of those things that are very unique, and something that is, you know, every organization really comes down to presenting differently and having different discussions. And so it's almost, I would say, better for you to get examples from your internal organization, and then you know, drive and mock off of those, and try to drive new concepts and ideas into those, you know, over examples from others. But we'd be happy to discuss it.
Great, thank you guys. In the essence of time, we need to wrap it up here, but for those questions we didn't get to, or if you have any other further questions regarding this topic, or also how our Office of the CISO team can help, the presenter's contact information is listed on the screen, or you can visit either Accuvant or Fishnet Security's websites. But thank you for your time today, and a special thank you to our presenters as well. We hope this webcast provided valuable insight, and that our presenters provided you with some tools for your next security conversation. Thanks again, and have a wonderful day.